missed it. There we go. Okay. So welcome, Dr. Bermudez. We're so excited to have you here for today's presentation, Dreaming of a Good Night's Sleep. We have a good crowd here, and we all cannot wait to learn more about how we can do that. So I will leave it to you, and a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll make sure to answer as we go along.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you everybody for joining me. And I do have the chat open. I just sent a message out to you because I do hope that it is an interactive space. So I don't have my video up because I got my notes up, but I do have the chat open so that you can, send me messages through there or, respond as we're going through. So it's a pleasure to join you. Like Jane said, my name is Dr. Christina Bermudez, and I am a clinical neuropsychologist. So I am not a sleep specialist, but I do love your brain. And so sleep being very, very important to your brain, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. I'm excited to do this presentation. It is one of my favorite ones to do. So what are we going to cover and talk about today? Well, we're going to give you a general review of how sleep works, because there's a lot of information about sleep out there, some accurate, some a little bit more myth than reality. So we're just going to give you a general review of how it is working within you from a biological standpoint, and how our behaviors and attitudes around it do impact. We're going to recognize some of the symptoms and consequences of sleep deprivation, which I'm sure most or not, some of you have felt at least at some point in your life, if not during this moment, and talk about how we can, do some things in order to help you if you do find that you are experiencing sleep deprivation at this point. We're going to also talk about some general tips for getting better sleep, and hopefully one or two things that you can pick up and maybe start implementing today or tomorrow as you're working on and helping this better sleep. And of course, how your EAP can help you within this process, both with this presentation, but also some of the other services that they may provide. Okay, so to get everybody kind of engaging and get started with this, we're going to do a little bit of a true or false hint here, right? So I would love your responses in the chat. I'm going to give some time for responses so that you can get involved, but some true or falses around sleep, because like I said, there's a lot of information about sleep out there, some more accurate and some more based in myth, but it's really hard to tell given all the information that is out there. So let's work with some true or falses here to see what we got. So true or false, all adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. What do you think? True or false? True, we got some trues, some false. Trues, false. So yeah, like a mix of representation of that. That's true. It's understandable. This one is going to actually be true, but I'm going to give you a caveat, kind of true. So it is true that adults need an average of 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And we're going to talk about how that actually more translates into REM sleep cycles, because that's a more accurate way to understand the amount of sleep that you need per night. And that there is some change in the level of sleep that you need throughout the lifetime, right? Like when you're in younger, earlier stages of life, you do need more sleep, and in part because a lot of regeneration of our cells, of our bodies happens during sleep period. So when you're going through growth periods like in infancy and in adolescence, that's part of the reason why you need more sleep, because you need that time in order to regenerate and regrow your cells. There's a part of a myth out there that, I can get away with 6 hours of sleep. And yes, some people can, but it's actually a very small percentage. There's a genetic mutation actually that does allow people to get away with like 6 or less hours of sleep. That's about 3% of the population. So if you're an average human being, you probably need 7 to 8 or 4 to 6 REM cycles per night to get good, adequate sleep. And that's also true in older adulthood, even though sometimes we think that older adults need less sleep. That's not necessarily the case. It just sometimes becomes more difficult to acquire good, solid sleep as we get older. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. But thank you, everyone who is responding in the chat. I love it. All right, next one. You ready for the next one? True or false? Snoring can disrupt sleep, but it isn't harmful. What do you think? True or false? False. And get some falses. Yep. All right, good job. Absolutely. This one is a false, right? This one is a false because snoring while on its own does not necessarily mean that there is something absolutely wrong. It can be an indicator that there are sleep difficulties or breathing difficulties that are occurring at nighttime, such as sleep apnea. And we know that sleep apnea can absolutely have adverse health effects from a physical, even from a mental standpoint. So sleep, if you are experiencing snoring or if someone that you love is experiencing snoring, that is a good sign to maybe get some evaluation around what is going on with sleep in order to make sure you're getting not just the time of sleep, but good quality, restful, restorative sleep. And we'll talk in a moment about what that looks like as well. All right, let's try the next one. Opening a window is a good way to stay awake when driving. What do you think, true or false? We've got some falses, trues, mixed responses on this one. Okay, so this one is actually going to be a false, right? We know that a cold air or cold wind can make you alert temporarily, but it doesn't make you less tired. And we know that sleep deprivation, even 24 hours of sleep deprivation, can start to have effects on your coordination and your response speed, even as much as if you were inebriated. So it only takes about a 24-hour period of sleep deprivation to really start affecting your ability to respond. So if you are driving and you are finding that you're drowsy, it is much better to pull off in a safe spot and take about a 20-minute nap to try to restore or switch drivers if that's a possibility. Because the cold air, again, might make you alert for a brief moment, but it's not going to do anything for your coordination and your reaction speed time. All right, let's try the next one. You should never wake someone who is sleepwalking. This one is one that I had heard too and had really kind of perplexed me. So what do you think, true or false? Lots of falses. All right. Yes, this one is false, right? So sleepwalking usually occurs during the deep stage of sleep, and we're going to talk about sleep stages in a little bit, but it's not harmful. You're not going to cause any harm to someone who is sleepwalking if you wake them. It might be difficult to wake them because they are, again, in that deep sleep phase, but you're not going to cause them harm. As a matter of fact, you might prevent them from injuring themselves because they aren't really consciously aware of what they are doing and can't quite fully respond to their surroundings. So this one is a false. All right, let's do one more. Men and women are affected differently by insomnia. What do you think, true or false? Trues, mostly trues. Yes. We're all doing a great job with these. Yeah, this one is true. So there is twice as many women as men struggling with chronic insomnia, so insomnia that is lasting for a longer period of time. And it could be due, it is due to a variety of different reasons, including, it is more common for women to experience or even to report depression, anxiety, and there's also certain life stages that give us different hormonal changes that will contribute just by their nature to difficulty with sleep. So we'll talk a little bit more about, gender differences and some things that you can do in terms of requiring better sleep. But yes, this one is true that women tend to be more affected twice as much by chronic insomnia than men. Right. So before we get into giving you an overview of sleep and sleep deprivation, I want to just ask you to think for a moment. And if you're willing to share in the chat, that would be wonderful. What is my mindset around sleep? So when I think sleep, I think what? Do I think I need more of it? Do I think, oh, what a nuisance? Do I think, oh, it's not really necessary? What is your mindset around sleep before we kind of get started in looking at all this information? More, that's a very common one. I need more sleep. Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that has contributed to us struggling with sleep and the quality of sleep is that we do have somewhat of for a while, I've had a cultural mindset that it is not as important, right? We tend to look at it more as a luxury rather than a necessity. And we've undervalued the biological importance that it has to our bodies, right? One of the first things that we're able or willing to sacrifice But the reality is that, we're understanding more and more, and science is helping us understand more and more the vital importance that it is for our health and well-being and functioning, right? Humans are one of the few species who are willing to kind of disrupt this real biological need more than any other species. And the reality is that it is as vital to us as our nutrition and to our water and all these other things that we do emphasize. So keeping in mind that it is vital to you, it is a vital piece of our biological makeup. So what can happen when we are sleep deprived? Well, extended sleep deprivation can cause some serious symptoms. It can cause things like hallucinations. It can cause things like increased sensitivity to pain, paranoia. It's even been used as a means of torture in certain situations. So extreme sleep deprivation will certainly have a massive impact on your functioning and on your biology. But the reality is that even, some reduced sleep deprivation can really affect your overall well-being, and has been linked to things like industrial accidents, right? If you've heard of Chernobyl or the Exxon Valdez, those or the Challenger accident, those have been big industrial events that have in part been linked to causes of sleepiness or fatigue to some of the kind of catastrophic reasons that they occurred. So we know that sleep deprivation can certainly pose a threat to our safety, but it also poses a threat to just our general health and well-being, right? When we are experiencing chronic sleep deprivation, we are at higher risk for chronic illnesses like heart disease and diabetes, and also mental difficulties like anxiety and depression. It also affects our immune system. We're actually at a greater risk of catching a cold, about 3 times of a greater risk of catching a cold when we are struggling with chronic sleep deprivation. So, animal studies are been a big part of what shows us that it's essential for our survival. One of them that was done is they took a rat, which has an average lifespan about 2 to 3 years, and they exposed it to ongoing chronic sleep deprivation, and it shrunk that lifespan down to a period of 3 weeks. So from 2 to 3 years, shrinking that lifespan down to a period of 3 weeks. So that's one piece of evidence amongst many others that tells us just really how essential sleep is to our biology and to our well-being. So it's not a luxury, and it's not also something that we can ignore. So how can we understand it a little bit better, and how can we make sure that we're experiencing it in a better and more helpful way? So here's where a bit of information hopefully is going to help us out and give us some tools that we can use. Okay, so how does sleep generally work, right? Sleep is a big part of our biological clock and our biological response. So essentially what is happening is that our bodies are responding to one of the main triggers that controls our sleep cycles, which is daylight, right? Daylight is one of the key environmental factors that triggers a part of our brain just above the optic nerves that turns on our master biological clock, essentially, right? And this internal clock that is cued by daylight is what regulates our body systems, including our level of alertness, our level of blood pressure and body temperature. And it's natural and normal that you're going to have fluctuations in this throughout the day. So there are going to be moments throughout your day when you're going to have peak energy, peak ability to focus, and that's going to kind of then come down and then bounce back up and then come back down. So this ebb and flow, the cycle of energy that is triggered by daylight and activates that master clock in our mind, it's called our circadian rhythm, right? Our circadian rhythm. So while there is some variation from individual to individual on your circadian rhythm, right, it is generally speaking something that is activated within us due to daylight or sunlight exposure. And then again, cued to dusk and sunset exposure, right? So we'll talk a little bit about how light can be a good point of intervention if you are struggling with sleep in a moment. But that's generally speaking the gist. So daylight, lights up that part of our brain that activates our internal clock and helps set our circadian rhythm. What happens when we're not able to follow this rhythm, when we're not able to get sleep and restorative sleep and get that basic need for sleep met for us, so those 7 to 8 hours, or 4 to 6 REM cycles, which we'll talk about in a little bit, what ends up happening is that we go into sleep debt. So we end up owing our bodies rest, right? This good restorative rest. And that sleep debt is cumulative. So it keeps adding up and adding up, right? So part of what we're going to talk about is, if you are sleep deprived, if you are in sleep debt, what are some of the most effective ways to start to repay that debt in a way that does not going to throw off your entire circadian rhythm clock, because that would also not be helpful in the long run. And I'm not sure if you have gotten, but there is a set of handouts that go with this presentation. If you haven't gotten them yet, I'll get them out to you, but there is a really good one in there that talks about the sleep debt and how to restore it. And we'll review it in a moment as well too. Okay, so essentially we do have daylight triggers our clock sets this rhythm. If we're not able to fully give to this rhythm the sleep that it needs, we go into debt. And if we are in debt, we're experiencing all these negative symptoms and we have to start repaying back that debt. Okay. Any questions before I move forward to this slide? Okay, awesome. Oh, and I see that we're going to get the handouts out to you in a little while, so that would be great. Okay, so how does sleep work? So sleep actually happens in different stages, and these different stages are also linked to different brain wave activities, and we see them throughout these different stages of sleep. But essentially what happens is that we have this first period of sleep, this stage N1 of sleep, and this is what is considered drowsiness. So it's when you're transitioning from wakefulness and you're going into light sleep, and your muscles start to relax and you're still kind of half alert, half awake, but not fully alert. So this stage is short. It's usually about 5 to 15 minutes, right, that you're spending in this stage. And contrary to popular belief, we don't go into REM sleep. So we'll talk about what REM sleep is during that first hour of sleep. We actually go into stage 2, which is light sleep. And that's where our eyes and our heart rate start to slow down and our body temperature drops. And usually half of our night is spent in this stage 2. And then eventually we enter stage 3, which is deep sleep. And here it's the deepest part of sleep. Breathing becomes more regular. Again, your blood pressure continues to fall, your pulse rate slows, and your brain becomes less responsive to external stimuli, making it, again, harder to wake up. So this is, if you're sleepwalking and not really alert, you could be in this kind of stage 3 sleep. Then what happens is that we go through this cycle back up, right? So we go from stage N1 to stage 2 to stage 3, and then we reverse that order and go back up. And that's considered one cycle. Right. And after this first cycle, then we start to enter into REM sleep. So what is REM sleep? REM sleep is actually a very active period for your brain. This is where a lot of stuff is happening. This is where you are dreaming and you might be experiencing dreams, but it's also part of the time where your brain is processing the information that you've experienced throughout the day. It is helping you navigate maybe difficult emotions that you've experienced throughout the day. So it's a very active part for the brain. It's also where dreams happen, right? And that cycle, that REM cycle, is about approximately 90 minutes. And something that can occur is if you wake up, for example, here at the bottom of a REM cycle, at these kind of bottom peaks in stage 3, you're going to wake up really drowsy, right? Because that is in the deepest parts of sleep. So you're going to wake up really drowsy. If you can time your sleep, in contrast, to wake up at the peak of that cycle, right, then you're going to be able to wake up with a little bit more alertness. So that's why I talked a little bit earlier about how those 7 to 8 hours are kind of true, because they are in essence, but essentially what you are wanting to do is get enough complete REM cycles, because getting that complete cycle is what's going to ensure that you're getting that good restorative sleep, right? So if you think about those 90-minute cycles, how many of them can you get in completely before you have to, wake up? So one way to start to set your alarm a little bit differently is to use a sleep calculator and calculate the REM cycles depending on either the time that you're going to bed or the time that you need to wake up, right? So if I need to wake up at 7 and I want to get enough of those 90-minute cycles, what time do I need to get to bed in order for those 90-minute cycles to be complete and I wake up, during that time? So yes, absolutely. There are sleep timers that can help you do the math. You could just kind of Google sleep calculator, and Nectar has a really easy one that pops up almost immediately when you Google it to help you figure out those REM sleep cycles. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay. And just for if you are curious, I did mention that there is differences in brain wavelengths that happen during these different stages. And that actually also correlates a little bit with hypnotherapy. So if you've ever done hypnotherapy or experienced hypnotherapy, part of what you are experiencing is a intervention during a period where you are in that stage 2. So kind of more similar to that REM state than if you were be having a therapy session that is talk therapy in the normal setting. So just a bit of interesting information there for you. All right, so why is sleep so important? What is it doing for us, right? Again, we're stepping away from that idea that sleep is a luxury or that sleep is something that we can get away with not getting enough of. Sleep's actually really, really important. So what is it actually doing? Well, it is not only is it restoring our energy levels, that one, kind of pretty obvious, but it is during sleep that we are repairing the cell damage that we experience during the day. So cell damage that we might experience from UV rays, or just if we're fighting off illness or infection or environmental exposures. This is where our immune system is actually most active and doing that repair work, right? Like I mentioned, it's also the period where we are promoting muscle and tissue growth. This is why, if you have teenagers, you may see them, kind of go to sleep. They sleep for like 12 hours and they wake up and they seem like they're about an inch taller. Well, in part, it is because they are doing a good deal or good amount of their growing during that sleep period. And adolescence is another good example of a life period or life event where hormonal changes do start to affect that circadian rhythm. So actually for adolescents, their alertness or their awakeness is actually a little bit later during the day, in part because of the hormonal changes that they are experiencing than it would have been in early childhood. So something to kind of keep in mind in case you are seeing changes during life stages of your family members. So it's restoring energy, it is repairing our cells, it is promoting growth, right? So that beauty sleep is happening there. But it's also boosting our immune system. Like I said, that's the time if you are not getting enough sleep where you might be more susceptible to infection or having a harder time in recovery. That's why if you do experience illness or are going through, some form of surgery or procedure, being able to get the best sleep possible is going to be important. And this sometimes can get complicated because some of the medications that we need to take for certain illnesses can interfere with sleep cycles, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. Also really important for our functioning, sleep is really, really critical to how we're able to process and deal with emotions and our mood. Just like it is the time where our bodies are restoring and repairing cell damage, the same thing is happening in restocking and rebuilding the neurotransmitters that we need in order to, be able to handle stressors. So that serotonin and that dopamine, which largely is created in our digestive system, is being restocked during our sleep. So if we are sleep deprived, we're not giving our body enough time to be able to restock these essential neurochemicals that we need in order to have, kind of healthy moods and healthy stress management and well-being around those things. If you've experienced, for example, something very traumatic, you might notice that your dream life or your sleep life is also affected and might experience nightmares, for example, recurrent nightmares. That's because sleep is also a time where our brain, like I said, is very active and it's working to process and help figure out our experiences and our memories. So if you're learning something new, for example, studying really hard for a test or getting a certification, all the learning that you're doing during the day is really important. But just as important is that quality sleep, because that's where all that information is getting stored, organized, and connected in a way that's going to be easy for retrieval and for use later on, right? So it is that time where our brains are processing all the stuff that we have had input during the day, or even that we have, kind of been thinking internally during the day, and sorting it for us. It's also kind of clearing out the stuff that we don't need, right? It's during this time that we see that cleaning of these plaques and tangles that are associated with memories that are not necessary or information that is not necessary. And it's also why you sometimes see sleep disturbance being linked to certain types of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's type dementia or Parkinson's disease, because it is part of that unhealthy cleansing process that is occurring if you're not getting that adequate sleep, or if it's being interfered for you in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so hopefully, we've gotten away from that mindset that sleep is a luxury. It's actually really important biologically, and these are some of the ways in which it does do a lot of work for us. It's not a rest or unproductive period by any means. Okay. So could you be sleep deprived? How many of you joining me are thinking, yes, I am probably sleep deprived? I can tell you that the majority of people are feeling that way. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can tell if you are maybe feeling those symptoms of that chronic sleep deprivation or a big sleep debt. So pretty obvious, a sign that you're sleep deprived is you're getting overwhelmingly tired, right? So like I mentioned earlier, we have a circadian rhythm that is going to have peak energy times, and it's also going to have some times of, kind of less energy. That's normal to have kind of these peaks and these valleys with regards to energy. But during these kind of valleys where you have lower energy, you shouldn't be experiencing such deep fatigue that you feel like you could fall asleep or that you are nodding off, right? That's an overwhelming tiredness that's suggesting to you you're not getting enough sleep. So that's a pretty obvious one. Here are some other ways to tell if you are experiencing some of that sleep debt or that could be connected to that sleep debt. Clumsiness, right? Like I mentioned, up even as little as 24 hours of sleep deprivation is going to affect your coordination and reaction time. Communication difficulties, you might find that you are struggling to just find the word, or it could be just on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite pull it. That's also a sign of sleep deprivation. Struggling with hunger, or a hunger that is difficult to satisfy. And that's because during sleep, which is a big part of our digestive system is active during sleep. And it is, creating those levels or those hormones of ghrelin, that is the hormone that controls our appetite, and also leptin, which is the hormone that controls our feeling of fullness. So if you're not getting good, adequate sleep, right, you may have a dysregulation in these two hormones that are cueing you whether you are hungry or whether you are full, right? So often hunger that can't be satisfied could be a cue that you are experiencing sleep deprivation. And on the flip side, if you can get a better handle on your sleep, you might experience this symptom of this hunger that can't be satisfied less, and that would be, kind of great for all of us. If you find that you are easily triggered or that you're experiencing intense emotion, so for example, you know that something might, kind of upset you, but you feel like your reaction is way greater than the circumstance might have called that, well, that again is because our emotional regulation is in part regulated and restored by sleep. So if you are sleep deprived, your emotional centers of the brain are over like 60% more reactive than they would be under conditions of like good, adequate sleep, right? And that goes for our stress tolerance too, or poor concentration to focus or to listen. Another good clue that you are sleep deprived is if you are falling asleep in less than 5 minutes. So if you're one of those people who like, I can fall asleep as soon as my head hits the pillow, and good, I don't want you to struggle with falling asleep, but if you're falling asleep almost immediately, that might be a sign that you are sleep deprived. Because that, if you remember back to the slide that showed that sleep cycle, that stage 1 N1 is usually a process that takes about 5 to 15 minutes. So if you're falling asleep immediately, it's saying, okay, your sleep cycle is somewhat dysregulated, and you want, to make sure that you are building on paying back that sleep debt so that it is not something that's happening to you immediately. Sorry, I think I skipped one here. The right one, yeah, okay. So is it a sleep disorder? There are a variety of things that we can label or list as sleep disorders, everything from insomnia, whether that is acute or chronic, to breathing difficulties like sleep apnea, to narcolepsy or parasomnias like nightmares or night terrors. All these are things that could potentially be a sleeping disorder. Now, we don't unfortunately have enough time to cover any of these in depth into this presentation, because this is more about creating a healthy habits around sleep. But in the handouts that are going to go out, they do an excellent breakdown of what these sleep disorders are like and some signs and symptoms of them. And I do highly encourage you to talk to your medical providers when you go do that annual health check, or even if you are noticing that you are having things like snoring or not feeling rested, even though you're getting enough hours of sleep, so to speak. I know it can be really intimidating, but what will it look like? It is, a review of your medical history. It is also looking at some of the medications that you might be taking, because like I said, some medications for things like thyroidism or heart disease, those can have some stimulant properties and can be interrupting your sleep cycles. So having a review of those, and reviewing maybe even some of the over-the-counter vitamins and supplements that we take, which could also be impacting sleep cycles. If you are experiencing some of these sleep difficulties and you talk to your doctor, it is possible that they may recommend a sleep study. And I know this can sound really intimidating. I had to have a sleep study, and I know I was really intimidated by it at the onset or thinking about it, but it really is essentially, they can send you home if it's ambulatory with a little monitoring machine, and a lot of, kind of devices that we have now, such as Apple Watches or monitors also do this. But they send you home just with a little bit of a device that's going to monitor your sleep movement, your breathing during sleep, and the hours and quality that you're sleeping. So could be really cool to find that information about yourself. So if you are looking at that handout and thinking, oh, I might be experiencing one of these sleep disorders, I highly encourage you to talk to one of your providers and see what more in-depth evaluation might be necessary. Okay, so what are some other things that could be affecting your sleep? Well, like I mentioned, there's physical conditions, different life stages or life periods. For example, like I mentioned, adolescence, but also during menopause, hormonal changes could also disrupt sleep significantly. Medication side effects. like I said, certain medications, for example, like for hypothyroidism, as well as heart disease, diabetes, asthma, could all have stimulating properties and keep you awake or not give you the quality rest that you have. And then there's also sleep hygiene, which is kind of the next part of this presentation. So what are we talking about when we're describing sleep hygiene? We're essentially talking about the environment, the behaviors, and the lifestyle that we have around sleep. Okay, so we're going to review those in a moment. But before we go to that, can you think of what is the number one sleep stealer that most people report, or that is affecting sleep most in most people? It's not on the slide. Where do you think is the number one thing that is affecting sleep in people? Good guesses. Yes, absolutely good guesses. So all of those are going to have some effect, and we're going to talk about some of the effects of electronic devices or lighting, for example, or our TVs or phone uses. But you got the answer right. The number one stress stealer of sleep is stress, right? And why is that? Well, sleep and stress have this symbiotic relationship. Essentially, when sleep goes down, as we talked before, when sleep goes down, our ability to emotionally regulate goes down, our ability to be effective and focused goes down, and that increases our stress. And when we are stressed, it of course is going to reduce our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. So it is a bit of a vicious cycle. So stress, sleep are incredibly tied and connected. So again, this is a good place where maybe your EAP could be a helpful tool, right? Because one of the things that we specialize in is in helping you identify some of your individual and personal stressors and help you navigate them and come up with more personalized individual strategies to help manage them and understand them a little bit better. So sleep, stress, absolutely very, very closely tied. But you've got support, so feel free to reach out to us EAP providers in order to help. Sleep is a common reason that we do get some referrals from people. Okay, so what can we do? What can we do with regards to our sleep hygiene in order to try to sleep a little bit better? And thank you, by the way, for the people that are responding in the chat. Okay, so the environment counts. The environment is really important. So when you think about good sleep environments, think cave. So think dark, cool, and quiet, right? You want as little amount of light as possible, because remember, light is one of those key things that is regulating that circadian rhythm. So you want as little light possible. And even small amounts of light, such as light from alarm clocks, can be disruptive to certain people. So turning off any unnecessary lighting, is important. You also, the slide suggests keep pets, kids, and other sleep interrupters out. I also do understand that for a lot of people, say, emotional support animals are really important in helping them have a sense of safety and regulating calm. So what I'm going to suggest is try, if you have a pet that is important to you, to make sure that there is at least space so that it is not disrupting your sleep, or if having similar circadian rhythms is important even with our furry friends, in order to be able to not disrupt our sleep cycles as well. Having comfortable pillows, beddings, and mattresses, things that are going to promote that coolness, right? So it varies for people. Of course, everyone has a different preference, but experts recommend having the temperature between 60 to 67 degrees for sleep, right? So having bedding that's going to keep you cool, not cold, because that won't let you fall asleep, but cool enough during the nighttime, but also keeps you comfortable and allows, kind of the air to flow and to breathe is really important. So the temperature recommended by experts is between 60 to 67 degrees, right? But again, everyone is individual. Find your sleep temperature. 69 degrees is my perfect flow. So that's what my thermostat is set automatically for that nighttime sleep, right? If eliminating TV and work distractions from your sleep area is also recommended. So remember, this is your cave, right? If you can possibly leave work or work related distractions outside of your cave, that is ideal. I understand that, like I said, in this modern world, we tend to prioritize, work and hustle over sleep and restoration. And I know that is the pull or the push and the temptation, but if you can't, I will advocate that you try to keep those things separate, or at least outside during set time, so that you start to behaviorally cue yourself that sleep time is not a time where you have these distractors available to you. Other things you can do is try to give your body a break from things that are going to kind of create that stimulation for nighttime. So you want to limit having a real heavy meal before bed. So no heavy food about 2 to 3 hours before bed. But you also don't want to go to bed hungry, because that's going to make it hard for you to fall asleep. So making sure that if you're having a larger meal, it's 2 to 3 hours before bed. But if you are hungry, a light snack that contains complex carbohydrates can help the body produce the hormones that cue sleep. So like a piece of fruit with almond butter, or whole grain crackers or toast, those could be helpful. You want to try to restrict the level of fluids that you have, simply because you don't want to have to take too many bathroom trips during the night, and especially as we get into older adult years. So if, having like herbal tea is part of your sleep time routine, I know it is essential for me, limiting the quantity so that it's not creating, again, that urge. Trying to avoid caffeine and nicotine is essential. Caffeine affects people differently. So some people might feel the effects for 12 to 14 hours, other people for 3 to 4 hours. So trying to get a sense of the caffeine and its effect on you is helpful, so that you can then start limiting that intake to earlier in the day, or however long it is going to be okay, that it won't necessarily affect you. And with that said, with the handouts that you're going to get, you're also going to get a sleep journal that you can take, where you can, for, I would say, like a week or so, record some of the behaviors or some of the things that you note around sleep. So for example, what was the time that you had your last bit of coffee or caffeinated drink, right? Because remember, caffeine is in a lot of things that are not just coffee. So like tea, soft drinks, chocolates even, right? So take a look at that sleep journal when you get it, because it can help you kind of pinpoint some of your specific culprits for sleep difficulties. You also want to avoid alcoholic beverages within 2 to 4 hours before bedtime, right? I know that alcohol can have a bit of like a sleepy sedative effect onset after you drink alcohol. But the problem with that is that even though it might make you a little bit sleepy, it does interrupt your sleep cycle, right? So it will disrupt that cycle, that REM cycle that's going, through those different stages of sleep, and not allow you to get into those deep stages of restorative sleep. So you do want to avoid alcohol intake 2 to 4 hours before bedtime. And like I said, sunlight is it's vital to our internal clock, right? So if possible, experts recommend getting at least 30 minutes of sunlight per day to help regulate your sleep patterns. And ideally in the morning, if you're able to expose yourself to light during that sunrise, it would be helpful. And in the evening, even if you take just a few moments to try to look or expose to that dusk light, right? Those are those big internal cues that are wired into our biological sleep clocks that help regulate that circadian rhythm. So if you can get some natural sunlight exposure at sunrise and sunset, that is helpful. If for whatever reason you don't have access to natural sunlight because your schedule, you might be in the office by then or doing something or not available, then the sun lamps or lamps that are used, for example, for seasonal affective disorder are also effective in helping you with this. And if you exercise regularly, that is fantastic. Of course, it is important to stress management, your overall health. But what you want to try to avoid is exercise that's going to really increase your heart rate about 3 hours before bed. Because part of what it does as a good natural consequence of it, it's going to increase the adrenaline and the norepinephrine in your body. And that's great, but it's going to make sleep a little bit more challenging, right? So avoid exercise that's really going to raise your heart rate for about 3 hours before bed. Things like gentle stretching or yoga is okay and can actually be really helpful with regards to helping you relax. Okay. So I know I'm giving you a lot of information. Please take these as potential recommendations. What I don't want you to do is to go out there and think I have to change everything drastically, because your brain is going to be resistant to that anyway, right? So just as you're reading all these suggestions, think about maybe one or two that you might be wanting or willing to implement as you're trying to get healthier sleep and maybe getting rid of some sleep debt. So let's talk a little bit about timing, right? So timing is everything when it comes to sleep. So although it's really, kind of obvious, go to bed when you're tired, this is something that if you think about it, we really learned how to ignore as adults, right? Like it's part of adulthood has taught us that like, okay, you push through tired to kind of get work done or get things done, right? But if we are able to reconnect with that of our body cues, it is really, really helpful. And I understand that sometimes our life circumstances don't allow for this. But if you do have some of that opportunity, I do encourage you to start reconnecting, regrounding with the body and its cues, because it is really smart in a lot of ways that sometimes we learn to ignore. Trying to stick to a regular wake schedule is really important. If you're anything like me, you love sleeping in, and I do love sleeping in. But if you are going to sleep in, for example, on the weekends, try not to do that for more than 2 hours than your regular wake time, right? So if you're waking up at 6 in the morning, try not to sleep in past 8, because then you start getting into patterns that might affect your circadian rhythm. So try not to sleep in past that 2 hour mark. The snooze button, again, I love my snooze button, but it's not our friend, in part because if you remember back to the slide that showed that sleep cycle, if you are hitting the snooze button and kind of drifting off back to sleep, none of that sleep time is enough to get you into that deep and restorative sleep, right? So you might be sleeping, but it's not really effective or efficient sleeping or restorative sleeping. So rather than using the snooze button, I do encourage you to look at a sleep calculator, right? And figure out those REM cycles and know that if this is wake time, it's at the peak of that REM sleep cycle, I'm probably going to wake up more energized than if I, hit the snooze button and I'm waking up mid REM cycle. Avoid naps during the day. Again, if you are in sleep debt and a nap is part of your plan to start to get some of that restorative sleep in place, try to not nap for more than 20 or 30 minutes and do it before, 3 p.m. in the afternoon or in early afternoon. Using pre-sleep rituals and like routines can be really, really helpful, not just for children. We often do this for children, but we can also apply it to ourselves as adults, because we behaviorally can start to cue ourselves and our hormones to start releasing if we train it that way, right? So if we start a routine, and it's going to take some time, it's not going to take into effect immediately, but a routine for 21 days or more or so can start to really train your circadian rhythm to say like, oh, this routine means time to start releasing the melatonin, the natural melatonin we have, and start to get to sleep. And a routine could be super simple. It doesn't have to be very complex. It could be just, I'm going to drink a cup of tea and listen to a specific piece of music, or I'm going to take a warm bath and that's relaxing, or even light a candle, an aroma that is relaxing. All those could be simple behavioral cues that, if we do consistently, can help set our brain in motion to release that natural melatonin. I got a good question as, can weekend sleep replenish lost sleep during the week? And the answer is yes, to some extent. So yes, you can start to pay back that sleep debt, on the weekend, but it's, that fine balance of paying back that sleep debt, but not disrupting your circadian rhythm. So that's why, like, sleeping in, but not more than 2 hours, for example, is a example of that, right? So getting in some of that additional sleep, yes, but not enough that it's going to disrupt your circadian rhythm, because keeping that rhythm is important for that long-term sleep health. Let's see what else. And this one, what happens, right, if you're trying all these things and you're like, okay, I'm going to get my sleep cycle, and you go to bed and you can't fall asleep, which happens to all of us, right? I'm sure it's happened to you at some point of your time. Okay. So my advice for this is, don't fight it, right? If you notice that you're laying in bed and it's been 15, 20 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, and you can't fall asleep, instead of staying in bed and tossing and turning, because this is actually going to produce stress, and stress is not going to help you with sleep, right? On the contrary, what I recommend, or what experts recommend, is to get out of bed, go to another area that is dimly lit, so don't expose yourself to too much light, and do an activity that is moderately, engaging, so not very engaging. So something like reading a book, but one that you're not really into, or doing something like a puzzle that's not really interesting, but something that's going to distract your attention from the fact that you can't sleep, but not be too engaging that now you just want to focus your attention on this. And then you'll notice that you start to get drowsy again, and then go back to bed and try again once you are listening to that internal cue. So yes, staying off the electronic devices during that moment is important, right? So have like an old book that's not very interesting be the thing that you go to during that time. But yes, it is better to get out of bed and try that process, rather than laying in bed after 30 minutes of trying to fall asleep and it not happening. We know that, obviously we talked about stress is really tied to difficulty with sleeping. So if you find that you can't go to bed because you just have this thought that's cycling in your mind, one thing that can be helpful is, again, to get out of bed for a moment in a dimly lit area, and maybe just write down some of those thoughts, right? Externalize them from within yourself, and then do a ritual of folding that paper, putting it away, maybe even taking it outside of your bedroom, to help your mind understand the cue that, yes, this is something that we're acknowledging is going on in your mind, but for the moment, we're going to externalize it and put it elsewhere, so that we can get some sleep. And then, of course, maybe look into getting some EAP sessions with a counselor that can help you really then dissect some of those stressful thoughts, or figure out what is going on there that is preventing you from sleeping. So like I said, a lot of tips of things that you can do differently. I don't encourage you to go out there and try all of them at once. That's going to be way overwhelming for your brains. So pick maybe one or two things that you think, okay, this is something that I can start adjusting and moving towards, so that I can get those really important benefits around sleep. So hopefully this presentation has helped you gain a mindset around sleep, that it is really important for our biology. It's really important for our overall well-being, as much as good nutrition and exercise, and that there is a lot that you can help and contribute to improving that sleep for yourselves. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. I am here for any questions that you might have for the next couple of minutes.
You were so thorough that nobody has any questions.
I know there's a lot of information on this presentation.
No, it's all good. I think sometimes we've maybe not, this isn't our first time hearing these things, but it's always a refresher. And, you know, to your point about choosing really only one thing at a time to change, maybe you've already changed one thing and now it's time to change another. So.
Or really, like you said, just reconnect with one, right? Like it's the most natural thing for all of us to have routines, and then kind of something happens and those get altered. But just a good reminder, like, oh yeah, these were things that worked for me, and I can reconnect with those things.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I think I see a question about melatonin as an over-the-counter supplement. So the long and short answer, obviously, this is going to be different for everyone, and I do recommend you talk to your doctor before any supplement. But it can be helpful in the short term to reset your circadian rhythm, but it's something that you don't want to take long term because it's not going to allow your brain to develop kind of those natural neurochemical cues for sleep. So that's kind of the brief short answer around melatonin.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, we actually have taught some sleep classes. So if you don't mind if I just add another piece here about melatonin.
Yeah.
So melatonin is produced in the body and it helps, it's a signal for when it's night and when it's, you know, your body's time to go to sleep. It's not actually technically a sleep aid. What it does is provide that switch to help your body understand it's night and it's time to go to sleep. So it might help relax you to go to sleep, not necessarily stay asleep. It's really helpful if you're traveling and, you know, you're in different time zones and trying to reset. However, I will say that the placebo effect, most people, I mean, and it's a real thing. And if you're not familiar with placebo effect, it basically just means there might not be any active, I guess, ingredient in something that you're taking, but simply the I guess, habit or the action of taking it. I guess what would be the right word, makes us believe or feel that it's truly working.
Yeah.
So they have found that there is a strong placebo effect with melatonin. So if you are taking it, if you do take it and you find that it does work on the nights that you need it, then, you know, by all means, unless of course your doctor is telling you not to.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, that it's about the mindset, right? And that's why we're asking the question. That's essentially what placebo is. It is a mindset that this is going to work for me, right?
Yes.
And if we apply that same mindset for other things like, you know, exposing to sun in the morning and sun in the evening, that may have the same amount of placebo effect that we want as well. So.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, I thank you so much, Dr. Bermudez. This was really great. Thank you, everyone else, for joining us. You will see a survey and some materials that we'll be sharing with you as in conclusion of the webinar. And we look forward to seeing you soon. We've got another one of these scheduled later this week, I think on Friday. So if you have colleagues who have not been able to attend, definitely let them know there's another one. So I wish you all a great day.